Let's talk about equalization today. The word equalize means to make even. When we're talking about audio, we're talking about evening out the frequencies, the lows, the mids, the highs, trying to get everything equal. When recording, sometimes you can add an equalizer to make a source sound better. The guitar doesn't sound quite right, we'll add some EQ to it. The better choice, though, if you have another mic, try a different mic. For reasons we don't want to discuss because of the technicality of the subject, let's just say if you find a mic that sounds better, use that one. You can use equalization, but it's better with a different mic. We often use equalizer when we're mixing down, trying to get something to fit in the mix better. An example may be you're doing a piano with vocals. Say that the piano's playing right in the same frequency where the vocalist is singing. And you want to hear the piano louder, you turn it up. Now you hear the piano great, but then you can't quite hear the vocals, especially some of the tone that you want to hear. So you turn the vocalist up. And then you can't hear the piano. What do? Often we'll use an equalizer to carve out a narrow little frequency by boosting something up or cutting it down to make both instruments equal. In a dense heavy mix, we'll use a lot of EQ maybe. And sometimes maybe that's not what you want to use. But what we're going to talk about today is what you can use if you choose and why you might want to use it. There are a couple of different kinds of equalizers. We're going to start from the simplest and then go a little more complex. We're going to leave out most of the technical information now. Simplest is a tone control, like on a guitar or on an inexpensive stereo. If you've ever ridden in an old car with an AM radio, that often has a tone control. And all that does is attenuate or reduce the high frequencies. Same thing with the guitar. It'll make it sound a little more woolly, a little more muffled, a little less harsh or strident. Using the car analogy, an FM stereo may have bass and treble control, so you can boost up the boom boom, get a little more thump going on if you want. And if the cymbals aren't quite as clear, if your speakers are old and tired or they don't have tweeters in them, then sometimes we need to add some high end to them, and that's with the treble control. If you've got a fancier stereo or EQ on your mixer, it might have a mid-range control. And sometimes that frequency is fixed. All you can do is turn it up and down. But a little more fancy is a semi-parametric equalizer, which means that you can turn the frequency up and down, and you can also move the frequency in a certain range, higher or lower. And maybe you can dial in that spot that's giving you troubles. These days, with sophisticated digital tools, you may have every kind of equalizer at your disposal. And when I'm mixing, I sometimes, especially live, I want the simplest EQ I can get away with because they're quicker to adjust. Going back to the old car stereos, a long time ago, people used to put in amplifiers in the cars that had a built-in graphic EQ. Sometimes this would have 15 sliders from bass all the way up to the treble. In my live PA rack, I used to always use a 30-band equalizer so I could zero in on a frequency that was ringing. So I would find whatever was ringing, the feedback frequency, boost it up to make sure it was it, and then I would bring it back down to narrow and hopefully prevent the feedback from happening. I use that on monitors all of the time, vocal monitors. Graphic equalizers are nice. The analog ones are noisier than a simpler circuit because there's 15 or 30 different tone controls going on. I tend not to use them anymore, but they're nice in certain applications. Then we have the full parametric equalizer. That was invented by George Massenburg in the 70s sometime. This is a great equalizer, and you can have 4 or 5 or 6 bands if you have an expensive or a sophisticated equalizing module. So we have the frequency, we can move up and down. We have the gain, that we can boost it or we can cut it down. And we can manipulate the bandwidth. We can make it wide, bell-shaped, or we can bring it down and narrow. And with that narrowness, we can sweep it up and down or move the bell up and down. Parametric equalizers are great. Super precise tools. They take a little longer to use because you have to dial in the frequency and set the Q, the bandwidth, but they're great tools. I forgot to mention 2 EQ types that may be in your equalizing module in your mixing board, and that will be your cut filters. We have a low cut. A low cut is also known as a high pass, so that'll cut all of the low end. For example, on a vocal microphone, you definitely don't need to hear 80 hertz. So everything below, if we cut that out, it's a chance to cut all this rumble. If you kick the mic stand, you get a great big boom. If we put a filter in there, a high-pass filter or a low cut, that minimizes the noise and doesn't blow up your woofers if you're really cranking it out. There's also a a low-pass filter or a high cut, and you can sweep that to cut out excessive noise. Use it to taste whatever you happen to need. Then there's our shelves. Shelves are more equivalent to bass and treble controls. The sophisticated models, you can sweep the shelf point up and down and even change some of the slope. But basically, you're taking all of the low end and you're either tilting it up or you can reduce it down. And they're the quickest controls to use if you just need to add a little more bottom end or a little more brightness to your equalizer up and down. Shelves are great to use. Now we're going to do a few mix examples. Who wants to hear about talking? I'm going to talk about electric piano first. This is out of a song called One More Time. I've got an electric piano in there. The first example is going to be, in my opinion, a nice unequalized electric piano. It's nice and full-bodied. It sounds really nice, and by itself, this is probably the sound I would use. But when I want it to fit in the mix, I want to thin it down, so I take most of the bottom end off, and this is what it sounds like. Now I'll use a guitar example. This is my guitar without equalization on it. This is my guitar now with EQ. I've taken out some of the bottom end Now this is going to be now an example of the mix without any EQ on it. Well, at least the piano, the vocals, and the guitar. It'll be a little bit more muddy. Let's take a listen.
Just get you back in love for one more time. Just get you back in love.
Now let's play that same EQ with some bottom end taken off of the electric piano, the guitar, a little bit of EQ on the vocals, and on a couple other instruments.
Just get you back in love for one more time.
Now this is a choice. After listening to the two different mixes, now I wonder, maybe I should go ahead and re-equalize some of these instruments. I might like the vocals not to be as thin. And maybe I like the electric piano a little thinner. But notice that there's more space between the two. I'll play them again. Here's the full mix.
Just get you back in love for one more time.
And now we're going to play the equalized mix.
Just get you back in love for one more time.
There's more space in the equalized mix. Maybe that's what you want. Maybe you like the full mix better. It's a choice. The mixer is the person that decides the balance. What do you really want in the mix? The hard part, I think, for mixing is you want to find a balance that works on buds and on bows. And what I mean by that is earbuds, like iPod earbuds, don't sound anything like full-size speakers. And Bose speakers, I think, are probably the most warm speakers around, one of the most, at least in the common speaker that you would find around. They're always fairly dark. They're a good one to check. So if you want it to sound good on your computer laptop, on your iPod earbuds, or on your phone, in a Bose system, in that dude's lowrider that has the huge big bass, you want to be able to hear the vocals and the big bass. But you want to hear it sound decent in your computer, and finding that balance is the trick. And equalization is a tool that you can use to find a niche for every little instrument and make it balanced so when you play it back on all of the different systems, that they're all acceptable. I would like great sound all of the time, but sometimes I'm just aiming for accessibility. Thank you for listening to this, and if you like this video, subscribe.